Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around for our panel conversation. Our panel's coming right now. We're going to get everybody set up and situated, and then I will get things going and introduce everyone. And there's a bottle of water right here. Wonderful. Need something?
We initially had her downstairs.
One more chair? Yep, we're bringing that right up.
Cool. So we'll scoot you and tuck you back a little bit.
Chair.
Perfect.
Coming right up.
Thank you. No, you're good.
All right, thank you guys. All right, everybody set up? Everybody good? Well, hi everybody, and welcome to our Athena panel conversation about the state of disability and the film industry. For those of you who watched Ella Glendining's film, is there anybody out there? Wasn't that film terrific? Let's give it a hand. That film has had such an impact since it was released and started the festival circuit last year. And that's what we hope to do today, make an impact and create space to talk about what's possible within the industry and disability. My name, just a reminder, is Andrea Passafume. I'm with the Athena programming team, and I'm also a part of the disability and film community. And I'm so pleased to be surrounded by this wonderful panel of incredible people. I'm so eager to have them share their wisdom, experience, talent, and insight with us, and I'd like to give them proper introduction. So we'll do that, and then we'll get started in our conversation. All right. First, I'd like to give everybody a proper introduction. I've got Day Al-Mohammed here to my left. She is an author, filmmaker, a disability policy advisor. She's a founding member of Forward Doc, which stands for Documentary Filmmakers with Disabilities. And that is a global intersectional community of disabled creators and allies working together in media to build a more inclusive, accessible, and equitable entertainment industry. She's currently spearheading a docuseries called Renegades about role-breaking disabled leaders in history for American Masters in PBS Digital. And as a policy expert with over 15 years of experience, she recently served tenure as a White House Director of Disability Policy in DC. Welcome, Dave. And this is my order. Jade Bryan, down there with the hat. Welcome to you. Jade is an award-winning filmmaker, an activist, and known as the first Black deaf woman filmmaker in America. She's been producing, directing, and writing films for over 25 years. And in 2023, Jade created a pilot, What Somalia Wants, which she wrote, produced, and directed.
30 years.
Sorry. Thank you. Also an entrepreneur, in 2021, Jade founded Deaf Talent Media and Entertainment Consulting, and also launched the company Deaf Talent Casting, a database and talent resource for industry and casting professionals. And among her goals is to use deaf talent casting to push for more BIPOC deaf actors cast in Hollywood film and TV roles, and to amplify Black deaf stories. Welcome, Jade.
Thank you.
And Melanie Hoy's right here. Hi. Melanie is a Director of Inclusion at the British Film Institute, the BFI. She advocates for increased access and equity in the UK film sector and consults and collaborates with global partners to embed diversity, inclusion in policy and practice. Her work contributes to providing equitable opportunities to persistently marginalized communities and also in celebrating great talent. She also sits on several influential boards and committees, serves as a Europe Council leader for the Gina Davis Institute, and is co-editor of the Black Film Bulletin section in Sight and Sound magazine. Welcome, Mel. Daisy, next to Mel. Hi. Daisy's a writer and director, and she's currently working towards a degree in film studies here at Barnard. Yeah. Her work is interested in exploring the complex relationship between embodiment, disfigurement, and desirability of underrepresented communities through film. Her work has been featured in Deadline, Out Magazine, and Director's Notes, and her directorial debut is the award-winning short narrative film, As You Are, which is about an interabled relationship between two young women, which has played many prestigious festivals, including Frameline, Outfest, Chicago International Film Festival, and of course here at the Athena Film Festival. I hope you all get a chance to see this terrific film. Welcome, Daisy. Page flipping, thank you. Bree Scalisi, we're so happy to have you, Bree. Bree, on the end, is a writer, model, disability rights activist, content creator, and actress. She's professionally modeled for Google, Victoria's Secret, Sephora, Nike, Adidas, Tommy Hilfiger, many more. She graduated Columbia with an MFA in nonfiction writing in 2020, and she also happens to be one of the co-stars of Daisy's film, As You Are. So please welcome Bree. Great, well, we're gonna be so happy to have you all. We're going to be covering, talking about a number of topics here today, but I would like to kind of start by reading just a few statistics from a recent study to kind of frame our first line of conversation. So a Nielsen study done in 2022 on disability representation in film and TV had results saying that approximately 26% of the population is currently living with a form of disability. Out of 164,000 films and TV shows that premiered over the last century, only 4.2% had significant representation of disability themes or content. An adjacent survey found that people with disabilities were often likely to take issue with portrayals of disability in film and TV. Viewers with disabilities were 34% more likely to say there was not enough representation of their identity group in film and TV. And the viewers with disabilities were 52% more likely than those without to characterize disability portrayals as inaccurate. So using those statistics as a jumping off point, I'd like to talk about storytelling first, among many topics we're going to cover today. Could you talk about, I'd love to hear from some of you about what do you consider authentic storytelling? What does that mean, authentic storytelling?
I'll go.
Please.
I feel like we have this conversation a lot, especially around diversity and inclusion, about authentic versus creative freedom, right? I just see it as, if you're making a film, you do your research and you tell the story properly. Like, if you were doing anything historically, you would make sure that it was as kind of, not jarring as possible. It reflected what you were trying to show, what story you were trying to tell. So it's the same for me when you're talking about persistently marginalized groups, in that with those stories having not been told in a kind of really broad way, in a really complex way, what we end up doing is relying on stereotypes and tropes, which are just really lazy and quite damaging, actually, because the stories we tell are powerful. What we want to project is what we want the world to be, what we aspire for the world to be. So for us at the BFI, we have a disability representation panel, which helps to, in lieu of us actually kind of hiring in a more diverse way, which is the next step. But we have a disability representation panel that helps, especially with our audience-funded films, so things that we're going to put into distribution, and if there are any kind of representations of disability or visible difference in those, we put them out to the panel for their opinion, because there will just be things that people miss otherwise if they don't have that lived experience. And that has actually meant that we haven't funded films for distribution, or we haven't taken them on, and we're looking to spread that out across. We have done that a bit with our funding as well in terms of what we're making. So I think, going on the disability justice tenet of nothing about us without us, it just feels like if you're going to be telling these stories, you need to understand, not be lazy and not be replicating tropes, and kind of really understand what a complex and interesting portrayal of people is like, and disabled people is like. So for us, and that goes into our policy as well around diversity standards, it's really about not being lazy and kind of telling all the stories that are possible to be able to be told. So from a kind of funding point of view, that's what we're interested in. We're not interested in telling lazy stories.
And I'm going to add to that, if that's all right. So one of the statistics you mentioned was that the Nielsen numbers were that 4% was representation. That's in front of the camera. That is not who's telling the stories behind the camera, right? And we just saw Ella's film, right? Now, she told her own story, her own experiences, and we got to see this entire arc and growth. Now, if it was somebody outside of disability, there might be, it'd still be a great movie, but there might be pieces missing. Like, think about her personal response to the idea of yes surgery, no surgery. That's a very personal story, right? We might not have gotten that kind of depth because it would be somebody from the outside looking in. It would have been, right? The movie starts about her search for anyone out there. Well, then the idea is, I found them. That's the end of the movie. But because she was telling her own story, she's like, there's all these other complicated feelings in it. It's a story about parenthood as much as anything else, right? And those are things that might be missing. So authentic storytelling is also making sure that there's this kernel of truth, right? Most documentary, most film in general is reflecting sort of a truth about society and about individuals. Documentary historically has been very extractive, right? You go in, I'm going to tell this story about this community that the world has never heard. That's great, it's educational, but when you walk away, that community is the way it was. And you're also outside looking in, so you might think something's important, but you're missing maybe some of the nuance of what it means. And so, in some ways, making sure that people have the resources and the support to be able to tell those stories means that we as an audience also get a richer, more full library of experiences that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Daisy, did you want to say something?
I had a thought, yeah. I think also to go off that with the nuance, I think in order to have something that is truly authentic, you have to like take your ego out of it in a way that a lot of other film doesn't necessarily lend itself to, because I think as artists, you want to kind of put your thoughts first, you want to put your ideas first, especially if you are a writer, if you are a director. But also the spectrum of disability is very, very nuanced and very different, and you have to sort of have the wherewithal to say, okay, this is where my knowledge ends and this is where yours begins. And I think it's much more of a collaborative process in terms of really doing something authentically, and you have to be willing to, if you do not want to tell a story that's exactly your story, you gotta be willing to meet people halfway or be willing to collaborate in a way that's much more generous and much more deep, and honestly makes for a much more beautiful product in the end. But I think having truly authentic stories, especially disability stories, you have to take that ego that's usually in it out, at least in some way, which I think is an important part.
Thank you. And I actually wanted to ask the question, how important is it that stories be told with disabled characters that are not necessarily about the disability itself? Let's talk about that. Bree?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important for stories that aren't just centered around disability to be featured. For me, like as a person, my disability is such a beautiful, important part of me, but there are also so many other parts as well. And I think that we have a lot of tropes and stereotypes of disabled characters. And I think that showing, you know, the disabled friend who's maybe a slutty mess and like goes out and parties, or you know, like the romantic interest, or you know, the silly friend. Like these are things we don't really see. There's always a focus on either like inspiration or the medical side, and I think that it's so important to just show us as full spectrum humans, to break down those stereotypes, to break down those tropes. Yeah.
Yes, I would
Jade?
like to say something. Hi, everyone. Back to the first question. How authenticity is supposed to be represented, correct? That was the question? As I was listening to everyone on the panel and listening to their, receiving their answers, I mean, I can talk about this topic all day. I mean, I've had 30 years of experience in regards to this topic, and the evolution and the change that needs to happen in regards to deaf stories in general. And, you know, it's, as far as BIPOC, the community needs to be represented by them, and it needs to be represented by deaf Black actors who are playing these roles. And we have to own our own stories, and we have to be the one to tell these stories. And we have to be the reference for these stories to be authentically shared and give our perspective and our approach and how we struggle and our joy. And we have to be the one to tell these stories. And I would like to talk about the film Coda and how that movie, it took off and it was impacted in many different communities. Now, me as a deaf person watching the movie, I would like to share something as far as the language. Me as a deaf person, I share the language with the deaf community. And our culture and our experiences are different. And it hasn't been shared on TV on that same level. Being deaf and Black, that story has not been told. And hearing people are usually telling our stories as a black deaf individual. And there's so many deaf and so many layers that hasn't been told yet. And as I was watching the movie Coda, there was one thing that struck out to me. I noticed how the characters were displayed as less than, and not as independent individuals. They're not autonomous. And it was portrayed as being pitied upon. And I'm done with the pity porn. I'm over it. Hollywood is stuck on that perspective. And until this day, I mean, for years, I mean, disability stories about being disabled, stories about being deaf, and overcoming diversity have been told from the wrong perspective. And where's the authenticity? We are humans. I'm deaf, yes. I mean, there's community that are deaf-blind. There's a community, disabled community that uses wheelchairs. We need more of that representation shown on screen from their stories, from their perspective. And we need to encourage deaf and hard of hearing and BIPOC writers and talent to represent and tell these stories and write this story to inform the community and let them know their perspective and let them in their identity. And it's still relatable and it's very important. And I am very inspired by that perspective. I mean, being pitied upon, I mean, I'm definitely over that perspective. That perspective has been portrayed for years, to be pitied upon. And it's time to end that.
Thank you for that perspective, Jade. We appreciate it. That also ties into the idea that not every stories need to encompass everything, not just, there's room for stories about disability and room for disabled characters that have nothing to do with the disability. They're human beings, right? We're all human beings. and stories that represent the full spectrum of that. Talking about, I want to offer one more statistic as we kind of move along on topics too. From that study, 95% of roles characterized as having a disability are portrayed by actors without that disability. So, authenticity in casting. What's harmful about casting roles inauthentically? We'll talk about behind the camera in a minute, but right now we're going to talk about in front of the camera. Why is it harmful for roles to be cast that are disabled roles by actors who do not have those disabilities?
So many reasons. I mean, so many reasons. I think I was watching Anatomy of a Fall recently, and which, you know, is a great film, but the boy in it isn't blind, but it's portraying a blind character. It was just really jarring to me. Like, it didn't make sense. You know, it didn't. And we were speaking to the producers who were saying, oh, it's because, you know, a blind boy wouldn't have been able to do what we wanted him to do on set. And I was kind of like, that's the issue, right? Like, why wasn't your set accessible? Or if he can't do those things, then maybe that's not a real portrayal. So I think really it boils down to, again, sort of authenticity and what perspective and voices can be brought to the portrayal of those roles, but also it's opportunity. So if a disabled person can't play a disabled person on screen, they can't be actors. Like, there's nowhere else for them to go. So we often talk to, we have committed to not cripping up at the BFI. We call it cripping up because of that, because it's about the opportunity too. It's like, the conversation is always about stars. We need a star to sell this movie. If you are never going to cast a disabled actor in a lead role, then how do they become a star? How do we ever see that grow? How do we ever see the 95% dwindle? It's not going to happen.
Right. And
I also think that disability is so intrinsic to every part of our lives as disabled people, the way that we move, the way that we experience the world, the way that we're informed about the world. And I think that for someone to try and act that, to act being a wheelchair user, a deaf person, a blind person, there's just something so completely, there's like a missing piece there that they wouldn't be able to get because it's not their lived experience.
Well, and then they end up hiring, we had an actor that's on our disability advisory group who wasn't cast for a role, but then asked to be brought back to show that the person who didn't have a disability how to use a wheelchair. It's like, just cast the person who's going to be able to do that. I mean, it's insane. It doesn't make any sense.
And for deaf roles, and Jade, I'm sure you are fully aware that, you know, people who aren't native signers are so obvious to those in the deaf community. You cannot learn to sign fluently overnight. That's a lifetime. That's a long, dedicated time. It doesn't work.
Absolutely, that's right.
Jade.
I mean, I see that happen often. And now it's been more portrayed for the deaf community to be casted for these roles. So we do see that less. And, you know, Deaf Talent Media Entertainment Consultant Agency have been watching and calling this out so that it doesn't continue to happen. And we want to make sure that the representation is authentic and we are the one voicing our stories and telling our stories. And, you know, more independent Hollywood companies are contacting me in regards to developing these characters. And, you know, that's what we're here for. Hire me for that. This is what my mission is. Hire someone on set that is a director artistic of sign language called Dazzle that will be able to provide the accurate sign language for the characters and that match the script. So that's what we do. I mean, that's what my company is, where it's a slow progress, but the change is happening. we need more influx of growth in our experience and actors that are gonna actually represent the stories and can act. So we're pushing for that. And so I am waiting for my TV pilot to be picked up. Fun fact. So if there's a buyer here, let me know. So we're selecting the festivals that we're going to submit our pilot to so that it can get picked up. Again, with my years of experience and doing film festivals, I want to represent my film and show my film to the audience so that they can enjoy it. And right now, I'm at the stage to show buyers so that they can pick it up. And I want them to meet with me and discuss further plans to put it on TV and give it to networks so that everyone can watch it. And that's my work. I want that to be shown and represented. And that's my focus at the moment. And people are, getting me to go into films. I'm like, no, wait, I need my pilot to be picked up first. So that's my focus.
Thank you, Jade. Let's talk about how does the disability community push back against the common objections and barriers to casting authentically or creating an accessible space, which are things like it's too expensive, accessibility is too expensive, it costs money to provide accessibility, the logistics of filming is too complicated if you incorporate disability, accommodations slow production down. How do you push back against these common objectives, especially if they're kind of coded and they won't really admit to that, but we know what's really happening? How do we push back effectively?
I mean, we have accessibility built into policy. So if you're getting funding from us, there is a part of the diversity standards which you have to meet to get our funding. One of those is about access and accessibility. So you need to be telling us how you are doing that on your set. But I think it is about a mindset shift. So, I mean, with all of my work, a lot of that is about embedding diversity and inclusion and access into people's work and into their thought processes. So anything less than, if you're just thinking, oh, I don't have any money, so I couldn't possibly have an accessible set, that's a failure of imagination. There's so many, also the assumption is you're talking about a wheelchair user or, there's such a spectrum of disability. And not all of that is going to cost you money. And also, we have so many examples of where people have made their set accessible, and it's better for everybody. The gaffers can wheel their equipment around down the ramps. It's like, none of it is that. The makeup assistant can go to the person's trailer as opposed to somebody having to get themselves into the makeup trailer. So there are so many ways in which you can do that work, and asking everybody what their access requirements is as a matter of principle and kind of just normality ensures that everybody feels more comfortable on set. So there's a lot of work to get there. I think people do just think, oh, it's going to be so complicated and cost so much money, but it doesn't always. And even if it does, that is what you should be doing to make, that is the right thing to do, and it can make things better for everybody. So I think we have a lot of conversations, but we also have it built into our policies so that we're able to have that conversation with the people that we're funding.
Thank you for that, and I wanted to tag on to that since you brought it up. Many times it happens, and I'm sure everyone on the stage can relate to this. Many times it happens, somebody well-meaning will invite a person with a disability or need of access in some way into a situation, a work situation, a conversation, anything, well-intentioned, but what happens is that the person gets there and finds that the space is actually not accessible. And somehow it always falls on to the person with the disability by default to create the terms of access. Let's talk about, maybe Day, you can speak to this. Whose responsibility is it to provide access and make that happen?
Okay, so I'll be honest, you guys, this is a setup because I asked Andrea, for
This was on here anyway, I'm telling you.
Because this is one of my huge pet peeves, because some of it is easy. So it's making sure, the person with the disability has to ask. The filmmaker with the disability has to make sure of. And so mine is, you are here in the audience. You showed up at the festival. There is absolutely nothing stopping you from, when you go to something, sending a little note going, hey, will you have captions available? Hey, will you have an interpreter available? Hey, is your space wheelchair accessible? There's nothing stopping you from asking that question, because it puts so much pressure on us to have to do that all the time. And you will have colleagues and friends of yours who aren't here, who probably should hear some of this as well. But there's nothing to stop you from asking that. I'm a blind person. I can't use captions. But you can bet I ask every time I'm on a Zoom or every time I'm going to, because you know what? That's something you need for many film festivals. It's something you need for distribution. It is something that is so common now, and with technology, isn't really super expensive. So there's zero excuse. So yes, I'm going to ask for it, and if you don't, I'm going to make a stink about it as well. But I shouldn't have to be the only one doing it, and someone who's deaf or hard of hearing shouldn't have to do it every single time, because you know what? Ella even said it in her movie, right? You're all here, so I get to keep referencing it, right? You get tired. You get really tired. So I'm going to stop. There's so much more to say on it, but I'm going to punt that down so other people can add.
Did someone else want to say something?
Jade wants to say something. I wanted to add, when we talk about accessibility specifically, I mean, there's much more depth that goes into that topic. People see money and expenses, but accessibility is a commodity. And we need to get sponsors, and often it does cost money, but it's not announced. Oh, we need money for this. Let's do this. We'll say we need money for accessibility, but then we use those funds for something else.
Or sometimes sponsors actually will sponsor something specifically to be accessible, and they won't actually use that money for accessibility purposes. So you see that happening as well. And we really need to pay attention to that. Well, people say, oh, it is accessible, and they've used that funding, but it is actually accessible in like one way, but not in a lot of different ways. And they're using it for other purposes. So we have to also be wary of that when that comes up.
Daisy.
Yeah, I also think like it's this thing where people are waiting in a way for it to happen on the highest level in the studio system, and that's not going to happen right now. So I think starting in the indie space, even though it does cost money, it's a way to also be creative. Like I was just on a set, and we were prepping to have a chronically ill actor, and so we asked a massage therapist student who already needed their hours for massage therapy school to come in and be a body worker on set, and that cost $0. And if when that film comes out and that film hopefully does well on the festival circuit, we can say, we were an X amount of money, small budget set, and we did this, 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 and this. You as Fox, you as Netflix, you as whoever have no reason not to do it too. So I think setting the precedent on an indie level in ways that don't cost that much money and are easy, quote unquote easy, make a huge impact, I think, and that's how you start. And also, like, you also start by having really good stories that are accessible about disability, and people say, wow, that's an amazing story, how can we sort of do that? Mm-hmm. And the more, everything's cyclical, of course, but the more accessible sets with disabled actors you have that create amazing stories, it gets out there, and then people start to take notice, and then it's a cycle. But I think starting in the indie space is less unattainable than people think it is.
Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about behind the camera. Disability representation behind the camera in crew roles, in the director's chair, in the producer's chair, creative executive roles, decision maker roles. Are the barriers any different for those wanting to be hired for positions behind the camera with a disability? What do you think?
It is difficult. It is a pain in the ass. And I don't have a more politically correct way to say it than that, right? Hey, I'm a blind person. I walk in and go, I'd like to direct a movie. Please give me $500,000. They're going to laugh, right? And that's not because I can't, but it's because it's just not something that people are familiar with. And this is where those biases start to play a role.
An unconscious bias, right?
An unconscious bias of I have no idea how she'd do that. And there's no chance to explain. There's no chance to even show what you've done before sometimes. It ends up being lots of little steps that take time. And a good example of this, my first film, and actually this is how it is, I made my first film. What is and it aired on PBS. Yay, that's great. Why did it air? Because I did what's the most common thing that they would air. It's about the Civil War, right? But it did well. So I was able to then go to them saying, hey, I want to do this story about amazing folks with disabilities in history. We don't know, we're not sure, disability is not sexy enough.
And tell everybody about that series.
So the initial thing was, it's not super sexy, but all right, you already did this one film on the Civil War, and it worked. So we're gonna give you a little money to make this thing about this person with a disability. I'm like, oh, I've got somebody for you. And so there's this pressure because you have to make it good, and you have to make it sexy and fun and exciting and all these things that are beyond. It can't just be a regular movie. There's this pressure. So we're like, we're gonna do a story about this woman called Kitty O'Neill. She was the fastest woman in the world and held that record for 50 years. She was a stunt woman. She was the high fall stunt double for Linda Carter and Lindsay Wagner. So basically, this woman was the Bionic Woman and Wonder Woman and the fastest woman in the world, and she was also deaf. And so we told this story about this woman who was this complete badass. And I use that term in every talk about it because it wouldn't let me use the term in the film because it's PBS. And they're like, oh, this is kind of neat. And suddenly in their rankings for just a short 10-minute film, it started going up. It's like, oh, this is doing really well. It's in like the top 15 of all of the stuff we put out. And I'm like, so can I have that money to do a whole series? And suddenly the answer was yes. But it took 5 years. It took putting out another movie. It took bringing on a producer that they knew. It was a whole list of things to get to that point. And then this year I recently threw another curve and said, so yeah, you gave me the money. I don't want to direct and film those. I'm going to bring on these 12 other filmmakers with disabilities, and they're all going to do the different episodes instead of me. And the idea being, once they have that gig, that pathway within PBS, then they're more likely to get hired for other things. But for behind the camera, because there's money involved, whether we like it or not, there's that question of risk. And the problem with that is, well, I don't know if they can do it. What you didn't know about this other guy, but you gave him the money, your question about this person is because they use a wheelchair or they're deaf, or and it shouldn't be like that, but it is. And so part of that is PBS recently announced this last fall their VIA initiative. So to create pathways for filmmakers with disabilities, and part of it is using that series because we got the door open to be able to do that. And the goal is from there, hopefully, to expand. But it still is, you have to prove yourself first. And the idea is finding funding where you can. And I think, like you pointed out, it's where the indies are. And from here, I'm actually going to punt it to Jade because I know she does the same thing I do, which is what do we do to get as many people through the door and seen as possible to have that proof? And we're using our names and reputations to make it happen, because otherwise you just can't do it. And people are making films on their credit cards, and they're like, well, they don't have experience, so I don't know if I can give the money. I'm like, how do you get the experience? So, okay, I'm going to pause there and punt it over.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yes, I am completely agreeing with you. So a situation happened. There was a white man with no experience really just fresh out of film school. And there was, I had an issue with Hollywood and trusting. Can they trust telling my story by a Black deaf individual? I mean, many times I have.
So they will go ahead and just give money to somebody who is typically white, just graduated from film school. And what they'll do is they give me money, just a little bit, but only because it's a tax write-off for them, because I'm Black, I'm deaf. And so that happened. For example, last year, when the TV networks were canceling so many shows, they were canceling all these shows. And they're like, oh, we're losing money, we can't distribute, we're just gonna keep canceling these shows so we can save money. And one of the reasons they were doing that wasn't for really because they were losing money, it's because they wanted to get a tax break. And so a lot of times they're doing these things out of fear or whatever, and there's a lot of the business side of it that's a little shady. So I would like somebody to give me the money because I'm a great storyteller and you believe in me, because sometimes you're just giving these money who actually don't have the same credentials I do.
Right, thank you for that, Jade. We're amazingly in our last moments here of the panel conversation, which flew by way too fast. I do want to mention something related to Bree. You and Daisy, actually, you are, young creatives, both of you coming up in this field. Bree, you have been using social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram as kind of these new ways to reach people, to share stories, and to impact advocacy for disability, which is great and such a way of the future. And Daisy, and before we wrap up, because we must wrap up, could you just tell me real quickly how both of you how do you see the future being? Is it optimistic for this road? What does it look like to you?
I think as a person who kind of came up in the age of social media, but at the beginning of my teenage years, it wasn't as prevalent, it has created an incredible community for me. I was the only visibly disabled person at my high school, in my elementary school. And so when I found this community on social media of other disabled people, it made me feel so much more seen, so much more worthy, so much more accepted and loved. And I was able to love myself more, finding my community. And so I think social media in general, although there are downsides for sure, has been really, really beautiful in connecting a lot of disabled people. So I do think there's hope, for sure. And I think that so many voices and disabled advocates have been able to come up. There's an amazing one in the audience right now. And really tell our stories, and in a way that we don't have to wait for someone to give us money. We don't have to wait for someone to pay the bill. We can tell our stories there. And so I think that could be a beautiful kind of step in the right direction.
Thank you.
I feel very similarly. I love to tell the story. I followed Bree on social media for about 5 years before the project started, and that's how I connected with her, and that's how I've connected with a lot of other incredible filmmakers, and disabled people, disabled young women, and that's literally why I'm here, is because of the communities that I have been able to find through social media, that Bree's helped me to find through social media. And I think it can be a little bit of a dangerous place sometimes, just being inundated by information all the time, with everything all the time, everything all the time. But I think it's a place where people can meet each other, people can feel a lot less alone. I'm a triple organ transplant recipient. I've been at this my whole life, and I grew up in the Midwest where nobody was like me, and I felt so, so alone. And I think meeting people who want to use their experiences to tell beautiful stories does give me a lot of hope, and does sort of, even in the response to our film, people have said, wow, I've never seen somebody that looks like me or a story that's like mine, and truthfully, that changed my life. And having that feedback, obviously, as a director, is the most beautiful thing that I could possibly ask for. But also then people taking that and people sharing that on social media and like has given me hope that the next one I do and the next one we do, like, will have that impact and will have a greater impact. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the time it's one step forward, two steps back. But sometimes it's one big step forward. And I think with people people connecting, it can be really, really beautiful. And also in terms of like communities and like mutual care giving, care receiving. Like, I have a friend who I actually met on social media who is in the chronic illness community, and I connected her with a bunch of other girls, and I sent her a link to the team of mine in Omaha, Nebraska, who is the only ones that are working on like further medical innovations for what's going on with her. And she went to Omaha last week to get treated by my team because of the girls that I helped her find on social media. So like, storytelling wise, social media helps. Medically, it's helping. Like, that's a long answer to your question, but yeah, I think there's hope.
Well, I think thank you so much. That's fantastic. And as we wrap up, I think that the bottom line is moving forward. The word is community. The importance that we move forward together in the spirit of community together, working together, and that's the one advantage that is going to make the path better for every future generation, right? Well, we do have to wrap it up now, but I want to say thank you so much to every one of you for being here today for this panel. You've contributed greatly. Thank you.
Can we do a group photo? I'd love to have a group photo. Can we do that?
Group photo.
Jade is asking.
Thank you all in the audience for staying for the panel. We greatly appreciate it. They do have to set up for the next screening, so we'll move along quickly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for coming.